Aha, hello cool kids. You know what that sound is? That's the sound of a door. That means this is a live music episode. Kind of a review. I'm not really sure how it's going to play out, but this is a gig I'm putting on. It's Nujumi, who is Dan Merrill from Dead Rat Orchestra. There's the legendary Jon Bowers, just master electronics and academia and all sorts of interesting stuff. Then we have Strandings, who is Robin Alderton from Dead Rat Orchestra. And then Mawhrin Skel, who's me, and I am on first. Oh, sorry, you got that. Sorry. So, bar person struggling in with a huge crates of red stripe. Because we're at the Smokehouse. Holy crap, how much I love the Smokehouse. Smokehouse, Ipswich, lovely sunny evening. It is, it's quite sunny and it's quite pleasant. Hopefully, that won't put people off coming. I'm only saying that, I'm not being negative, but as a promoter, these thoughts do crop into your mind. So thanks for tuning in, settle back, let's see how the evening progresses. Welcome along to Beat Motel. So I like to add the caveat of let's see how the evening goes. And last night my plan was to have conversations with various people who are playing and give you kind of a good feel of how the whole night went as a whole. In reality, because I was the promoter, I was putting the gig on. I spent most of the time sat outside the venue, or not, like in the foyer, so I could hear what was going on quite clearly, although a little muted through the big heavy door and whatever. But I didn't really get the opportunity to chat to people. It was a really cool night. But to give you a bit of background, the people on the lineup, I mentioned a minute ago in the intro that a guy called Dan Merrill, who I've been in a band with, and I've known him for quite a long time, and he's been living in Egypt for a few years. And the next guy on the bill was Jon Bowers, who kind of well known locally, internationally to be fair. He's lived all around the world, and he hasn't played in Ipswich or Suffolk quite a while. He's been living up in Newcastle. And then the other guy was Robin Alderton, who was in a band with Dan Merrill, and again, very well known, well liked locally. Hasn't gigged a great deal recently. So there was a lot of people at the gig who just hadn't seen each other for a long time, and it was pretty well attended, and it was a really nice environment. But while people were so enthusiastic about seeing people, catching up with people, I didn't want to drag people off into a corner for a quick chat. Sometimes that's fine, sometimes not so much. But I am going to catch up with Dan Merrill, hopefully while he's still in the country and in person to record podcasts with. And same goes for Jon Bowers, because he's just a very interesting musician, an interesting person to speak to, as is Dan, as is Robin, to be fair. But right, so on with the review. First of all, I played. I think it went okay. I don't want to talk too much about what I did. I was doing my thing as Mawhrin Skel. I'll tell you what I did. I had an analog synth and a little like an envelope gate filter thing. It was fun. I liked it. Next up was Strandings, who is Robin Alderton. Strandings, I've seen him a few times. He does this thing with old record players. And in fact, if you go back to one of the very first episodes of this podcast, the Cuckoo Farms gig, he performed there, and I spoke to him there as well. He does it. It's fascinating. It's really hard to kind of describe the sort of music that Robin makes without just relying on cliches. But hey, sometimes cliches are there to be used. Sorry, excuse me. Definitely tell this is the morning after a gig, and I don't smoke. Sort of ethereal would be the cliche I'd use. It's certainly not just sort of drifting, aimless. It goes places. I was speaking to Robin after the gig last night, and just saying that I've seen him do this thing a few times, but I've never seen it arrive at sharpness, kind of hit peaks. The dynamics of it were absolutely fascinating, admittedly, though I was hearing it through a door. And I didn't realise until I saw pictures this morning that a friend took, Jason, who goes under the name Italian Books, pictures he took of the stage, that Robin also had a small harmonium with him on stage. Now, I don't know how I didn't notice, because I was on stage. We did this thing at electronic gigs, if there's not too many artists, where we set up everybody at once. So normally in a band, the person who goes on last sound checks first and then breaks down some of their, removes some of their kit, then the next person comes on, so there's a lot of gear changing. But because there was only 4 of us, we basically set up massive tables. And yeah, he had a harmonium, and it just, the sounds coming through the door and the sounds on the clips of video that have been posted on Instagram and elsewhere, just absolutely magical. There's such a depth and a warmth to everything Strandings Robin does. It just, if he's coming near, go see him. Look him up on Bandcamp. Just support artists like that. He's a talented, brilliant, wonderful, interesting man. So next up we had Jon Bowers, who was going under the name of Jon Bowers. Whole bunch of modular type electronic gear, just various things. I don't want this to be like a rig rundown of what he was doing. Jon's sound, sometimes abrasive, sometimes, I wouldn't say challenging, but sometimes it doesn't go places that I expect it to go. With a lot of sort of electronica verging on noise music, you kind of know the destination, you know the direction. With Jon, you never do. He also did something that I don't see very often at electronic gigs. He talked to the crowd. He talked to the audience. Before he started, he introduced what he was going to do. He had a new album out, actually, so I'll put a link to Jon Bowers' new album in the show notes. And he explained what he was going to do and what was behind some of the music he was making. And I spoke to him afterwards about speaking to the audience. And incidentally, Dan Merrill, Nujumi, did as well. He spoke to the audience. I spoke to them both, and they said it's breaking down the barrier. It's partly making clear that being a musician isn't a lofty height, isn't a lofty thing. It's something else. I'm not going to go too into depth with that because I'm sure that'll come up when I get Jon and Dan on a podcast of their own. But it's just kind of nice, not through a microphone or anything, just kind of shouting. The Smokehouse, the venue we're in, isn't huge. You could probably just talk at normal volume and most people in the room would hear you. But yeah, again, Jon Bowers, always fascinating, always different. Always sort of same ballpark, it's always going to be electronica, but even that being said, some of the sounds he makes don't sound obviously electronic. Right, so finally we had, I'm going to say Nujumi. Him and I were having a conversation last night that we've both got band names that people don't know how to spell or say, act names. I've spoken to Dan this morning and I've got his permission to play some of the recordings I took during his set last night. So before I explain what the performance looked like and what equipment was used, I'm going to play the first of one of those clips. So this is Nujumi. Am I saying that right? I'm literally I put the gig on myself, but I just kind of always thought in terms of my mate Dan who's playing, rather than how you're actually supposed to say his name. Nujumi, I'm going to say, is Nujumi. Well, you can see that if you're listening to this podcast. You've probably seen the title of this episode. So anyway, let's start this review of Nujumi by listening to some of it. Now, bear in mind, I've recorded this in a small room, so this is not off the desk. So it's a little rough around the edges, but I think you definitely get a feel for what it is. Here we go. This is Nujumi. There you go. What did you think of that? I mean, actually, before I carry on, I just want to say I've moved from my study to my lounge. So I'm laying on the settee because I thought the study sounded a bit echoey. I'm still kind of perfecting the best way to make this podcast. I make podcasts professionally for clients, and then it's all studio microphones and stuff. But I use a range of different things for this podcast, which is of very little interest compared to what we've just heard. That music was quite wild. I mean, obviously this is an audio podcast, is an audio platform, so you don't see what it was. So I'm going to try and set the scene for you. Fairly small room. The capacity of the Smokehouse in Ipswich is 80. The stage is a reasonable size. It's probably half the size of the average living room. The sound system is exceptionally good, and it's run by just brilliant people. All the volunteers who work at the Smokehouse and all the sound engineers, lighting engineers are just so good. And I'm not just saying that because the engineer I booked for last night's gig is my bandmate from These Are End Times, Gareth. But it's just excellent. So we don't have a ton of space. And Dan, bearing in mind he's travelled over from Egypt and he was doing a few other dates around the UK as well, he said he's slimmed down his setup. Now, I don't know what it looked like before he slimmed it down. I assume he needed a flatbed truck or something to perform on, because his setup was a table, just so many bits of gear. Again, I'm not going to do a rundown, but there were drum machines. There was a Boss RCO 5 looper, which was used to great effect. Just synths, just bits and bobs. If you're listening to this and you're an electronic musician, you might identify with what I'm about to say. When I get a new piece of gear or try and use bits of gear I've had for years, I sometimes think, is there anyone on earth who actually knows how to connect all these things with MIDI and get them synchronized, and how to get this bit of equipment over here doing this while this one's doing this without them? It's pretty complicated. Well, it turns out there is. Dan can do it. Nujumi can do it. It's probably because he's a very good musician. That absolutely will help. But he also used to teach sound tech, as did Gareth, actually, my bandmate who I mentioned a minute ago, and they both taught at Colchester Institute. Anyway, I'm going wildly off point. The music really struck me because it's so well balanced, and it's so gentle, and it's getting emotion into music is not easy, because it can either come off sounding cliched, it can come off sounding disingenuine, or it can just sound a bit icky. The emotion he puts into his music is so gentle and genuine. So, in addition to the table of many cables, I quite like that phrase, the table of many cables, Dan also had a violin. Now, when Dan was in These End Times, he played violin with us. Violin is very much what I think a lot of people would associate with Dan. He's done loads of great stuff, including, I'm not going to start listing all the things he's done because there's quite a lot. So you heard at the end of that clip a real life violin. Dan picked up his violin and just played that just absolutely fantastic. I would call it a solo or violin part. So I think rather than me kind of rabbiting on like this, I ought to just play you another clip of Nujumi. I'm out in the garden now because, well, why not? That descending violin riff at the start is just fantastic. What a great sound. When Roland started making electronica gear, the drum machines and all the bass, or the stuff, let's just call it that, the intention was that people would use it to kind of mimic a full band. Seeing Dan Merrill last night at Nujumi is the only time I've ever seen someone actually achieve that. I'm just going to stop laying on the superlatives here. It was good. And I think listening to it is probably going to give you a far better feel for the night than me talking about it. Speaking of talking, we had a talker at the gig last night. As I say, it's not especially loud, great sound, but it's not deafening because we want people to be able to hear the music rather than be pounded by it. On this occasion, other times we want people to be pounded by it. But there was someone talking really loudly, and I could see everyone's heads were starting to twitch around, and it was starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable. They were just chatting with enthusiasm about what was going on the stage, which was lovely, but eventually somebody went and had a word. I felt bad for the guy who was talking because it's a really safe environment, the Smokehouse. They make a real effort for it, and that's what I want as a promoter, but sometimes some people might just need a little nudge, a little friendly nudge. They just let you know, I think you might be disturbing other people. But let's not dwell on that. Let's just get some more lovely Dan Merrill. Nujumi. Oh, God, start calling him Nujumi. Whoops. I'm in bed now, because why not? I recorded each of those segments at random. I don't know Dan's set. I don't know what it's going to do, which direction it's going to take, which are going to be the high points or low points. Well, I don't think there was any low points. So the recording's done at random, and I'm really pleased I got the end of his set. This is the tail end where he's properly letting rip on violin. And I only realised when I listened back to the recording this morning that there's vocals in there somehow. I don't know where they came from. He wasn't singing. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen someone sing while they're playing violin. I'm not sure where you put the microphone. But the crowd absolutely loved it. That's why I left all that lovely applause on the end. Overall, last night just felt really special. All gigs are good. Very rare that we have a bad one. There's always something good that you can take from any performance, even if it's an act you don't like. But sometimes as a promoter, you get a gig that really feels like everyone's come together to make something really, really special. I mean, as the promoter, all I did really was book the venue and do a bit of promotion. It's the people who come to the gig to perform and the people who come to the gig to listen to the music and absorb it. That's what actually makes the night. Oh, and of course the hard work of the sound engineers and the volunteers and the bars. There's a lot of people involved at an event, and being a promoter isn't a lot of fun a lot of the time, but you only need one gig like last night to really spur you on and keep you going for a bit longer. We more or less broke even last night. It's difficult. It's difficult to have to keep putting up door prices. £7.50 last night, and that's about the highest I've gone. But no one cared. No one minded. Only one person complained, and that's only because he thought I said £10.50, and he thought that was an odd amount. But anyway, back to Dan. I've deliberately not really slotted Dan into a genre whilst talking about this. I mean, it's clearly electronic, and there's a violin, and it's because I don't know what genre he is. What on earth is that? And I mean that, yeah, that's a really nice thing. Dan explained during between songs that he's been quite influenced by living in Egypt for a few years, and I think you can hear that in the music in a way that I can't. I'm not enough of a musician, or to be fair, enough of a reviewer to be able to divine. But there's certainly an otherness in Dan's work now that I've not heard before, and he's a musician who constantly evolves, never repeats himself. Just seems to perfect one thing and move on to another, which makes him so interesting to follow. So I'm gonna stop this love fest for now, as well earned as I think it is by Dan and Jon Bowers and Robin and everyone at the gig, and just say thanks for listening to Beat Motel. Please check out all the acts. I'm going to put the links in the show notes, and just keep going to gigs, keep taking chances, and keep listening to Beat Motel. Yeah. I'm going to say goodbye now and try and find the stop button. Where is it? Oh, there it is.